Расскажите, пожалуйста, о вашем проекте и о целях, которые он преследовал.
Про фильм you спрашиваете?
Да.
Could you say a couple of words about your film and why did you do it? What was the goal of making the film?
How to Survive a Plague is a documentary film about early AIDS activism, mostly in New York, which was the epicenter in the early days of the AIDS epidemic. And it's a story about inaction on the part of just about everybody when the epidemic first began, including the government, including hospitals and scientific research facilities, and how that inaction was eventually got to the point where the community itself of people with HIV and AIDS and their advocates had to take things into their own hands. So in the course of the telling of the story in the film, we see the development of grassroots AIDS activism that ultimately helped produce the drugs that in 1996 made surviving an HIV infection possible.
Скажите, как вам кажется, на протяжении всего этого времени, которое вы исследовали проблему, изменилось отношение к ЛГБТ в американском обществе? И если это так, то каковы были причины этого изменения?
За какое время, спрашиваю, 2 года фильм снимал?
Ну, я так понимаю, что речь идет о раннем периоде.
Okay, so at this time, like when you were actually like following the situation with LGBT, so has the level of acceptance in the society changed, and how people think about LGBT, has it changed, and if yes, so how?
Well, that's an important part of the question, because at the very beginning, the community of lesbians and gay men had no traction in civil society, really. There were no rights for gay people. It was illegal in most of the United States to be gay. And the really early efforts of the movement to try to gain laws to protect in employment or to protect specifically against crime were not succeeding very well. So it was a very early time for gay people, and we didn't have role models at the time, really, in media or in the public eye, in politics in any way. There were no, I don't think in 1981 there were any known elected officials who were gay and lesbian. And that's the world that HIV first struck in, and that's the world that activism of the kind that Peter pioneered, really, was essential in not only demanding some accountability on the part of government and research, but also saying, you know, look, the victims of this epidemic are worthy of a compassionate response, and in fact, that we were really citizens, and to say that in the mid-'80s was to say something that most people didn't believe.
And gay rights really struggled because most gay people stayed in the closet. And AIDS forced us out of the closet. It was either speak out or die. And so as a community, we came out and started protesting in the streets and became a national news story. And almost overnight, we shattered the American myth of the homosexual. We showed the country that we were angry, strong, together, determined, and we were not going to be ignored. And that changed perceptions very quickly. And all the gay rights that have happened in America since then are because of that moment. It really broke the logjam.
Скажите, пожалуйста, в Украине наверное, одним из основных противников ЛГБТ-сообщества, и в том числе людей, и особенно людей ВИЧ-инфицированных, выступает церковь. церковь проявляет, как ни странно, очень много жестокости по отношению к этим людям, и были случаи, когда церковь выгоняла больницу со своей территории с ВИЧ-инфицированными пациентами. В США есть ли проблемы такого масштаба у ЛГБТ и у ВИЧ-инфицированных с церковью или нет?
So in Ukraine, church is one of the most fierce enemies of LGBT people and of like people with AIDS. So probably you heard about the story about the hospital which was forced out of the territory where church is. So are there any problems of this kind with church in the U.S.?
Yes, gay people around the world have often been oppressed by fundamentalist churches, conservative religions. It happens all around the world. It happens in America. Most of the anti-gay opposition in the U.S. is religious-based, people pointing to the Bible. But it's always very selective pointing. I mean, if you actually read the Bible, there's, you know, all sorts of crazy stuff about what you can't and can't do that most Christians are ignoring. And they're being selective about what they read. And it's really them finding an excuse for the bigotry and hatred that they already hold. And they're using that religious text as their excuse. So when the churches and the religions enter the political sphere by trying to oppress our rights, we have every right to challenge them and the churches in the political sphere. It is not us condemning religion. It is condemning the political position that the churches are taking. And we are doing it in the political sphere. And we need to push back, and ACT UP pushed back against the Catholic Church when it came out and said that people shouldn't wear condoms, that it was immoral to wear condoms. They still say this today. And it's craziness, because we know it's the best way to prevent the spread of HIV. The church's position actually would spread HIV. And how Christian is that? What would Jesus say to that? It's insane. And so we fought it. And I think the vast majority of Americans and even a majority of Catholics are with us on that. They think it's a crazy thing to say. So.
Well, I think the goal of activism, when it comes to addressing the kind of crimes of religion against gay people, is to not change the attitudes of the church itself, but to show how wrong they are to everybody else. And that's where victory can be attained really quite quickly, where people, when they're given the information and given the understanding of how dangerous accepting church teachings can be in certain areas, then what you've really won over is the general population. You've won the hearts and minds battle. The church, surprisingly, at least the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, has been following. And the new Pope has surprised everybody, I think, with his statements of inclusion and compassion and generosity to the LGBT community. And I don't think we would have seen that if it weren't for the battles that were being fought around AIDS starting in 1982 and moving forward from there, and proving even to the leadership of the religious institution that their positions were not just cruel but immoral, and caused not just hard feelings but death. And so in a way it's a long battle but it's winnable.
На территории всего бывшего Советского Союза очень негативное отношение к ЛГБТ-проблематике. Как вам кажется, это специфическая черта культуры этого региона или это посттоталитарное наследство, которое со временем пройдет?
So in all the countries of former Soviet Union, the people don't really think well of LGBT and their issues. They don't like them really. So, what do you think? Could it be the cultural difference for this region, or it might be post-totalitarian attitude that will pass with time?
These are the challenges that we've all faced, I think, and some of our communities have come from further behind in terms of acceptance, but the journey, I think, is going to be the same for everybody, and that's really convincing individuals one at a time, neighbor to neighbor, that they know people who are gay, and that people that they know and like are gay. That's the point I want to make. That they already know and like people who they don't know that they're gay. They're related to people that they don't know are gay. They are, they work for people that they don't know are gay. And until, as Peter was saying earlier, until like this magical veil is lifted from everybody's eyes and they see that they've already developed a relationship with and accommodation with the LGBT community, it'll be a struggle. But once you make that connection, I hate to bring in social science on this, but there are studies that show that people's perspectives change in polling immediately upon realizing that they know that somebody they know turned out to be gay.
So the coming out process is key to progress, absolute key. And I think Ukraine has an advantage to where we were starting in the U.S. In the early 80s, where America didn't even discuss homosexuality. It was not in any press. It was not on any TV. It was not in any international press. But now we have broken the logjam of a discussion about gays and lesbians as an international movement, so that even if the polls show that most Ukrainians say they don't know somebody personally who's HIV positive, they know about the issue of gay rights. They're hearing about it from the national press. They're hearing about it in their own press occasionally. And so at least that's going to start piquing some curiosity. That's going to allow people to feel some comfort at coming out. It will get the ball rolling. And at some point, every place in the world hits a tipping point where the populace realizes they've been on the wrong side of history, and things speed up very quickly at that point. But everybody should realize there's only one ending to this story, and that's full equality. We will win in the end. We're showing that in the States, we're showing it throughout Western Europe, and equality is inevitable.
Кроме открытости и смелости, о которых вы уже сказали, что вы, может быть, могли бы посоветовать для того, чтобы ускорить этот процесс? Может быть, есть какие-то механизмы адвокаси, которые могли бы ускорить этот процесс признания и принятия обществом, таким как украинское, гей-сообщество, как равных?
So beside of being open and brave, could you give any more advice of what like local LGBT community has to do to make this equality like come earlier?
Yes, come out when you can. Slowly, do it as safely as you can. Find some friends. You'd be surprised how there might be one or two members of your family that will be okay with it. But find a local LGBT organization. Strength in numbers is a huge quality to any movement. So make sure you're in touch with other gay people somehow, either on social media or through the multitude of LGBT rights groups in the Ukraine. And very recently we've seen in the Ukraine a burst of exposure for gay rights with one of the leaders of the gay rights movement, Fulcrum, testifying for the very first time in all of Eastern Europe in front of Parliament as an openly gay man. A lot of interest has been generated, and the country talked about that. The press seems very interested. He appeared on a talk show talking about his life in a way that I think the general audience could relate to and feel compassion for. And if you continue to push yourself in front of those cameras and make yourself a story as a movement for the press and in the news and in storylines, that will speed things up dramatically.
I guess I could only add that that it's important that we tell our own stories, that we be in charge of our own narratives, and if that means publishing our own papers, if that means getting our written work in newspapers and magazines or on websites that have influence, to seize control of the narrative of the community in a way that makes it more difficult for others to promulgate falsehoods about the community or scare people in ways that they that aren't true. And I think that in all the countries where we've seen LGBT rights take hold, we've seen also the very early harnessing of the media in a way that allows or makes it so that these falsehoods can't continue. And those are one of the tools that are used by the opponents of gay rights, and they have to be neutralized as well.
Как вам кажется, какую роль в этом может сыграть и должна ли играть власть, или это исключительно гражданское движение должно быть?
What's the role of the authorities in this process, or you think that there's a responsibility mostly of civil society?
Well, I think elected officials respond to what they perceive of as the general will or understanding of their constituents in a way, and you can change their minds by changing the minds of the people. You can change their minds by changing their minds also, but if you're in a position, as I know you are here, where that the intransigence of the anti-gay mythology is so strong that maybe the best approach is to go to out to the people and bring it back in that way, I would think.
But you can always find allies in almost every institution, including in Parliament. I'm sure that there are sympathetic MPs. I'm sure even in the police department in Kiev, relations can be built over time as they seek to do gay pride parades in a safer and safer way over the years. We've seen it in other cities, even in Eastern Europe, where relations with the police have improved, and relations with specific politicians. So always look for your allies. They're there. They're always there, and find them and work with them. It makes a stronger movement.
I should also add with some honesty that one of the things that if you were to dissect what happened in the United States over the last 30 years, that you would find is that the movement was finding gay people inside these organizations and developing an underground conversation with them about, so that we would know what was happening inside. And we were getting information from gay people gay men, lesbians, trans people who are working inside the federal government and inside all of the institutions that we were struggling against, and they were sometimes giving tools to the activists that made the work of the activists much more productive in a way. And so there was also a kind of an underground aspect to it that was...
It's impossible in Ukraine now.
I'm sorry?
It's impossible in Ukraine now, I think.
It's impossible to find those people. Well, you know they're there. And it might be impossible for them to talk to you. But unless they feel like they can do it safely. And that's the way it was being done in the early days in the States, was really this very secretive flow of information that ultimately built this web that was strong enough that it could start establishing itself with its own voice in a way.
Thanks. I think it's enough.
Okay.